this weekend podcast that we're not doing this week.
Jesus doesn't think you're a freak, or if he does, he thinks you're a freak in a good way.
Trust me, you two, I know what normal talk is. Hi, I'm Paul Acey. I'm here with John Bolin, creator and director of The Thorn, a movie based on the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And there's a lot of other things in it, too. It's coming to theaters March 6th through Fathom Events. Welcome, John. It's so great to have you here.
Paul, so grateful to be here. Excited to talk about The Thorn and Jesus a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked like 3 gazillion years ago when I was in a different job. You were still working for The Thorn. And one of the things that just fascinates me about this production is that it's been a part of your life for 25 years now?
Yeah, 25 years ago, The Thorn was born when I was working as a youth pastor here in Colorado Springs. And I could tell some of that story of how it first began.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's been 25 years now.
Goodness gracious. Yeah, so tell us how it did begin. Am I remembering this right? Was it originally a Halloween production?
It was. So here's the actual story behind it. My wife and I were working as youth pastors for a church here in Colorado Springs, and I was a brand new youth pastor, so I didn't know, I'm not trained as a seminarian or a theologian. I began as a volunteer youth pastor. My degree's in marketing. So I was afraid to preach. I really didn't know that I had what it took to preach. My parents were both professional stage actors. They met at the Goodman Theater in Chicago. And so I kind of have the theatrical blood in my system. So instead of preaching on Wednesday nights, as a youth pastor, we would do a lot of, back in the 90s, we called them illustrated sermons, right? So we would have a lot of music and drama and videos. Yeah. I remember a few times we would have pyrotechnics during these youth meetings.
Oh, my goodness.
And but there was one Wednesday night after the youth meeting when I was sitting on the edge of the stage, Paul, and this 16-year-old girl is sitting next to me, and she's bawling. She's just weeping, and she holds out her arms, and I could see where she'd been cutting up and down her arms.
Wow.
And I turned to her and I said, "You don't have to do that because Jesus took that for you." And I thought to myself, the young people were going, especially at that time, and even not even more so today, I think, but they were just going through emotional trauma and physical trauma and incredible pain. And I thought, I want to do an illustrated sermon next Wednesday night that shows the price that Jesus paid for us. I wanted young people to see it. I didn't want to be gratuitous, but I didn't want to pull any punches. So right. I thought, let's do a drama where we show what Jesus did, what he endured for us because he loves us this much. So I wanted young people to really see that, understand that no matter what you're going through, there's one who gets it. There's one who's been here. And then the second thing that I wanted to show was what I consider the supernatural battle for the identity, the calling, and the destiny of this up-and-coming generation. So I thought, let's do that in a drama. We'll show kind of this supernatural battle, and we'll show the price that Jesus paid. So the next Wednesday night, we did the very first Thorn performance. And the truth is, the reason I called it The Thorn is because the youth pastor before me had done a drama called The Whip, Hammer, and Cross. It was the only thing I could think of that was left was the crown of thorns. So I thought, okay, I literally called it The Thorn walking onto the platform that night.
Oh, you are kidding me.
So it was just like that. And if I would have known it would last this long, I might have picked a better name. But actually, I think the name, it works just fine. So we did the first performance, and Paul, it was bad. It wasn't great. The music was not great. The acting wasn't great. The makeup was really embarrassing. There was no lighting. It was 4 people in the corner of the room turning up and down lights. But it was like the presence of God was there. I think that the Lord loves it when we tell his story. And something happened in that room. And several hundred high school kids experienced Jesus face to face that night. The senior pastor of the church poked his head in the door and said, "Hey, would you do this for the church next Easter?"
Wow.
So we had a few months to kind of recraft things and then do it for the next Easter. And I didn't know how to do that exactly. So we read a lot of books and watched how do we do a production at this scale for this bigger church. And we did it for the church the next Easter, and there were a line of cars that couldn't get in the parking lot to the church to see this production. People were driving onto the field and crawling under the barbed wire fences to get into this church to watch the production of The Thorn. And I think we may have had 5,000 or 10,000 people come that first year. And then for the next 10 years, we did The Thorn every year as part of this local church. And it grew in scope and scale, and we began to add different things. My wife and I went to Las Vegas one time, and we saw Cirque du Soleil for the first time. And I remember seeing the makeup and the movement arts and the set design and the costume design and the music was amazing. And I was really moved, but the story wasn't redemptive.
Right.
And I thought to myself, what if we could use these same things and tell the greatest story of all? So that's when we began to incorporate some of the really dramatic parts of the Thorn that are unusual for a typical Passion play. And so now here we are 25 years later. It's an independent production company that now we tour with about 45 world-class performers. And that's kind of brings us to today. But that was the very beginning of the Thorn.
That's incredible. It really has been sort of this this journey for you. I mean, to be a part of this for more or less 25 years, to watch it grow the way it has. You mentioned that people just resonate. God loves to hear this story told. And obviously people really do too. What do you think has drawn people year after year after year to the theatrical production?
That's a great question, Paul. What I think draws people to the Thorn is a number of things. One is the subject matter itself. It just is the greatest story of all, and I think it grabs people's attention, especially when you're talking about the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. It's just fascinating. But also the way that we tell the story creatively attracts and grabs people's attention in a way that maybe a traditional Passion play wouldn't do. And because we designed it for high school and college students from the very beginning, that's still who we work hard to appeal to. And so the comment that we get all the time after the Thorn is, I didn't expect to see that. People, when they have a certain expectation of what they think maybe a Passion play is, and when they walk out of the Thorn, we typically see, people wiping their eyes. We see jaws dropped. We see people saying, that's not what I expected to see. And so if we can reach people with the story of God in a way that's excellent, in a way that's unexpected, and in a way that's deeply moving, I think that's a powerful combination.
Yeah, and it really is unexpected. The first time I saw it, I had the privilege of seeing it in person. You do see a lot of elements that you just don't expect. I mean, there's people coming down from the ceiling, there's dances, there's these screen presentations, and it begins, as I sort of hinted at the very beginning, it begins at the beginning, the very, very beginning. And then it sort of runs into sort of the fall of man, really, and then heads to the redemption of man with Jesus. That's an incredibly ambitious stage production. But then to take that production and move it to film, how did that work? Tell me about the process of moving this extravaganza, what some people have called sort of a cross between Cirque du Soleil and the Passion play. How does that work on film?
So I wish I could say we had this grand plan and all that. It didn't happen that way. It was really more of it was like it was like the fourth quarter, fourth down in inches. It was the Hail Mary of the Thorn. What happened was COVID in 2020.
Sure.
We had been touring for about 10 years. And our touring team, we've got about 40 or 50 performers. And these are world-class performers. We have on the tour this year, we've got some dancers from the Joffrey School in New York, which is one of the top schools in the world. We've got former Broadway lead performers. In fact, I think a few of the performers that were in the lead in Cats, which is not my favorite Broadway show, but it's a fun one. They're part of the Thorn. We've got U.S. Olympic quality gymnasts and world champion martial artists that are part of this. And then, of course, the singers and the dancers and all the different performers are amazing. So we've been touring for about 10 years or so. And then 2020, we did our first two cities. We did Bakersfield and Sacramento, got to Colorado, set up everything. We're ready to go. And then got the call that the governor said, you had to shut everything down. You couldn't have anything more than 200 people in a room. And of course, we had thousands coming.
Right.
So we shut down the Thorn tour for the year. And I remember 2020.
And you were independent, right? I mean, you were dependent on.
Oh yeah. There was. We didn't have a promoter. We weren't under a local church that was paying for everything or supporting it. We're just an independent production company, and so we didn't know if the Thorn days were numbered. We didn't know if we would ever tour again. At this point, I think everyone in America wasn't sure, would movie theaters come back? Would live events come back? And then we turned the clock from 2020 to 2021, and we didn't tour at all. We were dark the entire year. And so I remember turning to Sarah and thinking, I think maybe the season is over for the Thorn. And it was a pretty dark year. It was a hard year, 2021 was. And then Christmas of 21, I began to hear about Dallas Jenkins taking The Chosen and doing a Christmas premiere in movie theaters. And I watched as the crowds showed up in droves. I mean, it was just a miracle what began to happen with that. So then I suddenly had this thought, I wonder if the Thorn, and Dallas did that through a company called Fathom, or Fathom Events. And that's a kind of an alternative distribution, a way of distributing movies on a they call it event cinema. So it's usually 1 or 2 days, and then it could carry on from there. And so I thought, I wonder if the Thorn could be fathomable, right? So we called Fathom Events and said, hey, do you think that the Thorn could work as a Fathom event? And Katie Sawyer there at Fathom said, John, we've been actually emailing you for the past few years. We think, I don't know what happened there.
Those emails, they get lost sometimes.
I don't know. I was like, okay, God, this must be your timing because I'm clearly not paying attention. But so she thought it could work. And the way that Fathom Events started was a way to broadcast the performing arts around the country. So if you wanted to watch the Metropolitan Opera or New York Ballet or Broadway in Middle America, in Denver, Omaha, then you could go to a movie theater and watch this production. And then over the past 5 years or so, Fathom has added this inspirational vertical. So some really great Christian films have come out and used the Fathom platform. In fact, I think a few of the Focus on the Family films have gone through Fathom Events, Lifemark, The Chosen, different films. So we said, yeah, let's try it. So then we thought, let's film it in 2022. That was last year. And we did a limited, we booked a venue in Colorado Springs and a venue in Denver just as a way to film the show. That was the idea. We're going to capture it on film, and that'll be a way to preserve the Thorn for the long term. Because we didn't know we'd ever tour again, but at least we could capture it on film. And so we booked 2 venues, and they both sold out. And we filmed the show in Denver in 2022 with cinema cameras. We filmed for a week, and I can tell you about that process. It was different than traditional filming. And now it'll be released in March 6th and 7th of this year. So we're excited about the journey. It's not a typical process of what it takes to make a feature film, and taking the live stage and adapting it to film, that's been a whole different challenge.
Well, exactly. That's what I think, especially when you're talking about a production as big as The Thorn, right? With so many different elements. I just can't imagine what it would have been like. And actually, as I was watching it, I'll tell you right off the bat, it translated better than I thought it was going to. When I first flipped it on, I was wondering, is this going to work? And it worked. The camera angles felt really strong. In some ways, it felt even more intimate than a stage production, which I was surprised.
That was part of the goal was, okay, for the people that have, and almost 1 million people have seen the Thorn live in 25 years. So we know we call them Thorniacs across the country. So how
sort
can
of like the Grateful Dead,
That's right. Yes, that's right. We're like the Deadheads. We're the Thorniacs. We thought, what could we do? How can we film the production in a way that would make it a new experience for the people that love this show? And so we thought, well, what have they never experienced? Well, they've never been in the middle of the action. You've always watched it from a distance, and it's such a big show. You're watching a big show from far away. Most people are pretty far from the action. So we got these 5 cinema cameras, and we had steady cams and jib cameras and handheld cameras, and we were able to get into the action. So we filmed for a week. 3 of those days, we just did what we call coverage. So there was no audience there.
Gotcha.
We were able to get into the action. So we would film, like we have this one scene in The Thorn. It's the Garden of Gethsemane scene. We call it the battle scene because we imagine as Jesus is praying, there's this supernatural battle happening around him. And so during that scene, we were able to get the camera into the action to film it in a way that you would never experience it in a live environment. And so those scenes really worked well. There was one element of the filmed live version that just didn't work, though. And that is, if you've been to the Thorn Live, some of you on this listeners will have been to the Thorn Live. We have a narrator, so there's only really one speaking part, kind of two, but one primary speaking part in the Thorn, and that's the narrator that weaves these scenes together. So you have a narration, and then you have these scenes acted out, and then narration, and it kind of explains it. Remember, it began as an illustrated sermon, so way back in the day, I was preaching. And then you'd have a scene, and then I was preaching, and then a scene, and then we thought, no one wants to hear me preach. What if we had a character tell the story? So in the case of the movie, we have an 85-year-old John the Beloved telling the story of Jesus, remembering from the cave in Patmos the story of Jesus. And so we watched the original assembly cut of the film, and that narrator narrating from the stage, which in the live environment, he breaks the fourth wall, and it's almost like a comedy routine. Right. But it's very dramatic, and it works really well. But when I watched it on the screen, it just didn't feel like it was connecting.
Right.
So then we thought, well, here's a problem. How do we solve this? And I had this idea. I wasn't sure if it would work, but I thought, what if we make John the Beloved? What if we shoot him in a more cinematic narrative environment, and then we give him somebody opposite to tell the story to actually stand in as the audience? And that's what we did in the film. Is we put John the Beloved on Patmos. We make up this new character. He's a 12-year-old slave boy named Asher who wanders into John's cave on Patmos. And basically what happens is John tells Asher the story of Jesus, and we cut back and forth, which again, I didn't know, would this work? Is it going to feel like a Frankenstein production? and I think in most places it works really well.
Again, I was surprised how well that particular piece did work, because you know it's being split. You can tell the cinematic version, you are taken over to the play version, but it seems to work. And I think that the addition of Asher actually drives home the point so much stronger. The idea that he's a slave boy trying to figure out his place in the world, who he really is, what he really is, and to feel that freedom as he hears the story. This man will set you free.
Yes, that's exactly right.
It's a really powerful thing.
That's right.
It's a really powerful
There's one scene in the movie. I think it's fun because we get to be on the nose with our faith film. A lot of times, in faith-based films, we don't want to be too much on the nose or it can come off cheesy. But in our case, it's the story of Jesus. So we can be, and we get away with it in a lot of ways. So John is telling Asher the story of Jesus, and there's one scene where he presents the gospel, I think, in as clear a way as you can hear it on screen, where he talks about what Jesus did on the cross, and he took our place. And it's a powerful moment, and I do think that people will connect and relate to this boy who's trying to figure out what he believes and who he is and what his identity is. And I think there's a lot of people that will watch and listen, and you can almost see the youth pastor in me going back and saying, there's these young people that have been that have listened to a narrative about who they are, their identity, and Jesus wants to come in to set them free. And what does the Bible say? Who the Son has sets free is free indeed. And that's kind of the idea behind it.
That's awesome. Now, the Thorn really stems from a long, long, long tradition of passion plays, right? It comes from, and even in the style, I've read a little bit about some of those early passion plays. They were these huge, elaborate productions that didn't have a lot of speaking roles. Was that sort of your intention as the Thorn sort of grew? Was it trying to sort of channel some of that history into a new and interesting form that would resonate with today's audiences?
Yes. And in fact, there's a number of things that have really informed the Thorn over the years. My mother, Via Bolin, she's a Latvian immigrant, an amazing artist, really, really amazing, fine artist. She was our set designer and artist for years and years with the Thorn until she was just too old to be able to do what she does. She's probably listening right now. Mom, I love you. But my mother went to Aberamagau about 15 years ago, which is the longest standing passion play in the world.
It's in Germany, right?
It's in Germany. It happens every 10 years. And this village comes together to tell the passion story in a way that's just breathtaking. And much of that passion play is without words. So you're watching things happen. So that's that's like the grandfather of all passion plays is Aberamagau. I remember her coming back with this beautiful book, color book, saying, look what they did and the way they told the story. And it's not, they were even being progressive in the way that they did the costume designs and the set designs and the colors. It was just beautiful. And so that's one piece that has informed the way we do the Thorn without words. The other thing that's really pragmatic, if I'm honest, is the very first year we did the Thorn, our Jesus character was one of my good friends, Mark Russell, he's from like backwoods Georgia. And so he had the strongest Southern accent you would ever hear in your life. And I thought, we can't give Jesus that particular accent. And so, and he played Jesus for about 10 years, one of my closest friends. And, so we thought, you know what can we do this without giving him lines? And actually it turned out to be amazing because people don't realize when they've watched the production that there aren't speaking parts and they put the words of Jesus into their own head. And so that's actually been a beautiful accident. And then of course, the other third thing was Passion of the Christ, which came out in the late 90s as the Thorn was just getting started.
Wow.
So I remember watching Passion of the Christ. And at first I thought, Aramaic? Like, you're going to do an entire movie in Aramaic? Who's ever going to watch that? Well, it turns out most of the world. And it was beautiful. And so there was something about creating this, like, creating a film in a way that wasn't in our tongue that still worked. And so it almost felt like that movie, you didn't know what words were being said unless you were looking at the subtitles. You didn't know what words were being said, but it didn't matter because the beauty of what he did and what he portrayed was there. So all those factors kind of led us to doing the Passion Play the way we do it.
Yeah, yeah. When you look at the world of Christian entertainment now, be it on stage, be it on film, we at Plugged In, we deal with a lot of Christian entertainment, and some of it is really good, and some of it could stand a little improvement. Do you have some advice?
You're so nice.
Do you have some advice for how Christian storytellers, those who tell their stories on stage, on screen, what advice would you give them on how to tell their stories well?
Well, it's interesting. I've thought a lot about this, Paul. I think back to the Renaissance, which, not to be dramatic, but the Renaissance, the church was leading the way in every art form, whether it was architecture, in stained glass, in fine art, in sculpture, in music. And then somewhere along the way, the church gave over the reins, and we essentially said, we'll just play second fiddle. We'll let somebody else take the lead, and we'll just take the cues. And I think right now we're at a really interesting place in history, in the body of Christ, where Christian artists are saying, you know what, we want to step up and really lead the way again. So you see that with what Dallas is doing with The Chosen in such an amazing way. So the quality of filmmaking, the quality of acting, the quality of set design, the quality of production design, and all the different parts of that. Saying we're not just going to settle for average. We're going to tell this at the highest possible quality. I mean, that's what I think God wants us to do. I think what Mel Gibson did with The Passion, the same thing, like really led the way in terms of beautiful filmmaking. And it's happening across the board. It's happening in literature. It's happening, I think about Mako Fujimura, who does amazing fine art and really communicates the gospel in his art, and it's in some of the best museums in the world. And so I think that's what we as believers need to do, is to say, let's tell this the best way possible. So with the Thorn in particular this year, the live show, historically we've been to mega churches mostly, but this year we've made a really big change, and it happened as I was walking through a performing arts venue last year. I remember thinking that we were looking at one venue as a possible Thorn venue, and I was walking back to the manager's office, and we passed these posters on the wall, and it was a poster for Les Mis, Phantom of the Opera, and Hamilton. And I thought to my spirit was almost like leapt out of me, and I thought, that's where the story of God deserves to be told. At the same place where culture is saying this is where good stories are told on stage. And so this year the Thorn Tour is going to performing arts centers and arenas only, because we want to be in the public square proclaiming the gospel. Wow. So I think God is calling filmmakers, storytellers, playwrights, songwriters. I think about Brandon Lake at the Grammys just a few nights ago. That's where God wants us to be, is leading the edge and not just following, but saying, what can we do to tell great stories at the highest possible level?
Yeah, yeah. So as you talk about these great stories, you've obviously been involved with the Thorn for a very long time. What's the future of the Thorn? What would you like to see for the Thorn? And do you imagine being with me in another 25 years talking about the next Thorn iteration, or do you have other plans beyond that?
Yes is the answer to all of that, Paul. The plans, God is doing more with the Thorn. He's done more in the past 6 months than in the past 25 years. I was telling you before the broadcast here, there was a point about 5 years ago when, if I'm really honest, I was ready to turn in the towel and say, hey, we're done with the Thorn. It's been a nice run. And my wife, Sarah, who really runs the Thorn, she's the lifeblood behind it. She's organized. She organizes the cast, the crew, the tours, all of that. She said, John, if you want to take a break, you can, but I'm going to continue to carry the torch. And she did for those 5 years. And now, of course, it's exciting again, so I'm back in, right?
Of course.
But really, God, we feel like, is just beginning the journey of the Thorn. We're actually planning for the first time ever a fall tour. So we'll be adding a fall tour to the spring tour. So we'll be touring twice a year, which makes the Thorn a year-round touring production. We may actually add simultaneous tours. And potentially we could have a West Coast and an East Coast tour happening because there's no superstar in the Thorn except Jesus, and I've got like 8 of them. We call them the GSI. And so we can have 2 or 3 tours, and they look identical. They look, and they're just as powerful as the one before. And because of the way the Thorn works with limited speaking parts, we can translate it to any language. In fact, we've done it 100% in Spanish, and it was one of the most powerful Thorn performances we've ever had was in Spanish. And so we're talking about a Latin America version. We could do it in Mandarin Chinese. We could do it, in any language. So I think the future of the Thorn will be an expanded tour, expanded reach. The film now is going to reach all over the world. We just found out we'll be in Africa, and
Incredible.
And we just signed a distribution deal to bring the Thorn to South Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, and Kenya. It looks like it'll also be in Mexico and Puerto Rico and across Latin America. I would have never seen this coming. It's only by the grace of God, and nothing we could have done to make that happen. So the Thorn will continue to grow. Will there be another movie version? Maybe in the future. We'll see. We have ideas. And then I think we would love at some point to see the future film division of the Thorn begin to grow and tell other stories, some that are historic, some that are modern, but in a style that kind of we like to tell stories in.
Yeah. Incredible. Thank you so much, John. Really appreciate you being here. Thorn in theaters beginning March 6th, Fathom Events. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Paul.